I love Christmas music. I really, really do. In fact, for me, Christmas wouldn't be Christmas without music of the season. But I haven't always been that way. Not at all. In fact, I used to hate, and I would use that word, the onslaught, and I would use that word, of Christmas music during the holidays. Absolutely hated it. But what I came to learn about me as I got older was that what I actually hated was Christmas music played prematurely. All right? October, hard no. That should never happen. Christmas music in November prior to Thanksgiving, still no. Should not ever, ever happen. There's scripture for that. I don't have time to go into it right now. But absolutely not. Absolutely not. But once Thanksgiving is over, through Christmas Day, I'm all Christmas music all the time. But a particular kind of Christmas music, I'm a little high maintenance. I prefer traditional Christmas music, stuff by Bing Crosby and Nat King Cole and Dean Martin. And if you're too young to know who they are, just Google it. So I only listen to the radio stations that will play that kind of music because I don't want there to be any possibility whatsoever that I will be exposed to Last Christmas by Wham. But there is one song that falls outside of the traditional category that I love hearing at Christmas. War is Over by John Lennon. Something about my wiring has always drawn me to music that mixes the ache of a world gone wrong with a hopeful thought that maybe it could get better. I'm a big fanboy of the band U2 because much of their music has that kind of vibe. John Lennon's Christmas song has that kind of vibe. But his song doesn't break new ground subject-wise. The longing for peace is a dominant theme in Christmas music. The oldest hymn that is sung by the church today is the Christmas hymn, O Come, Emmanuel. That 9th century hymn's final stanza in its modern form says this: O come, desire of nations, bind all peoples in one heart and mind. Bid envy, strife, and quarrel cease. Fill the whole world with heaven's peace. So the longing for peace in Christmas songs is an ancient longing, and perhaps even more so as we approach Christmas 2025. Our year has been filled with shocking political violence and ever-widening division in this country and in ongoing wars in our world. Those that track such things tell us that there are currently 120 armed conflicts worldwide, a number that has been rising and is at its highest in decades. So we are a people, we are a world, now more than ever, that is truly weary for peace. And if you pay attention, that weariness for peace isn't just for peace on earth. It is for peace in us. I have noted as a pastor that there is a restlessness and an anger that lies just below the surface of more of us than we will care to admit. And add to that the weight of a life that has not turned out as we had hoped, or some ongoing situation that just won't go away. I find that people are filled with a profound sadness. They want peace. You are weary for peace. Keep that in mind as you find Psalm 46 in your copy of God's Word. This Christmas season, we're doing something we've never done. We are reflecting on the Psalms under Advent themes, because frequently the themes upon which we meditate during the Advent season work their way out in the Psalms. And today we come to Psalm 46, a song which approaches the subject of peace much differently than Lennon's Christmas effort. Lennon hoped for peace, Psalm 46 boldly proclaims it as a reality. And that's where we're going to spend our time today. I hope you found Psalm 46 in God's Word. Would you stand, please, as we honor its reading this morning? Psalm 46. To the choir master of the sons of Korah, according to Alamoth, a song. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. Selah. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, and the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Selah. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought us desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Selah. May God add a blessing to the reading of his word, and you may be seated. Now, one of the most helpful things, in my opinion, that you can do when you are trying to help a psalm become richer in meaning, to really get to the heart of it, is to try to pinpoint the occasion of its writing. Some psalms just do this for us. Psalm 51, for instance, tells us that it was written after the prophet Nathan confronted David about his murder of Bathsheba's husband, so he could take her as his wife and cover his tracks for fathering a child by her. Knowing that makes the words of that psalm and the cry for forgiveness much more meaningful. But most psalms are not that explicit, and such is the case here. There are two theories that have been proposed for the occasion of its writing. The newer one makes a good case. It is the one that is most in vogue today, but I prefer the older one. And so here it is. Chapter 20 of the book of 2 Chronicles provides an account of a coalition of nation states from the area corresponding roughly to the modern nation of Jordan, launching an attack against Judah. Judah's king, a man by the name of Jehoshaphat, calls on the people of Judah to gather and to seek the Lord in the face of this threat. And when they are gathered, a prophet named Jahaziel declared that the Lord was going to fight this battle for them. All they needed to do was gather together and march out to face their enemies. And when King Jehoshaphat heard these words, he calls on the people right then to bow down and to worship the Lord. And when that happens, 2 Chronicles 20 verse 19 says, "And the Levites and the Kohathites and the Korahites stood up to praise the Lord, the God of Israel, with a very loud voice." Now, without going too deep into the weeds here, the Korahites became the leaders of choral worship during the reign of King David, and thus they are the ones who are leading the people in 2 Chronicles 20 in worship in response to the promise that the Lord would fight the upcoming battle for them. And when the Lord does as the prophet says he would and miraculously defeats Judah's enemies, we are told that the people return to Jerusalem and the temple with harps and lyres and trumpets. Now, there are 11 of our psalms that are attributed to the sons of Korah. It always shows up in the superscription. That's part of the reason I read the superscription. There's usually useful information in it. And Psalm 46 is one of those. And while it isn't definitive, it is certainly possible that Psalm 46 contains the words of praise that were sung in 2 Chronicles 20:28 when the people return triumphantly to Jerusalem. God had done it for them. They needed just to be still and know He was God. And He had brought them peace. Now, there are 3 peace declarations that are made in the words of Psalm 46. I want to survey them quickly for you. First, they let us know that we have peace in a world of chaos. I want you to note the imagery that shows up in verses 1 through 3. The earth gives way and the mountains collapse into the sea. The sea itself rolls and foams. Volcanoes swell to the point of eruption. That's the point of verse 3. In other words, the entire terrestrial world is in chaos. In fact, we are meant to understand a world unraveling into the pre-creation chaos that is described in Genesis 1. The psalmist has in mind a situation where it literally feels like the world is coming completely unraveled and apart at the seams. And yet, in the face of the catalog of cataclysm in verses 1 through 3, the psalmist states, not because they've quit experiencing these things, but in spite of these things, he says, we will not fear. Why? Because of a bedrock belief that the Lord is their refuge and strength and a very present help in times of trouble. This is a confession of confidence that is more than just a slogan that we pick up on some knickknack to put on our mantles from Hobby Lobby. It's a testimony born in the face of catastrophe before God has delivered the psalmist from it. This is faith. So Lennon had a hope for peace. In a world of chaos, the psalmist sings of the actual experience of peace in a world of chaos, not a hope. That's the first declaration of Psalm 46. The second declaration of Psalm 46 is we have peace in a world of fear. Verse 8, the psalmist speaks of the nations raging and of kingdoms tottering. The picture here is really just kind of the geopolitical version of the planetary chaos described in verses 1 through 3. In fact, the word rage in verse 6 translates the same verb that is translated as roar in verse 3. The psalmist is telling us that the tottering kingdoms mirror the tottering mountains. And all of this is meant to picture a world that is gripped by fear. Nothing can be trusted. Why? Because the God against whom they rebelled, this is the point, is bringing His might against them. The phrase, the Lord of hosts, is actually a word or a phrase with military connotation. So verses 6 and 7 are a picture of God leading His armies against the rebellious kingdoms of the world, and those kingdoms experiencing an impending doom because of it. Now, if you want to know why there is so much fear in our world today, there's your answer. We know something is wrong, and we look for the problems everywhere but where it locates, hearts in rebellion against God. And because we cannot know what is wrong, we're scared. And Psalm 46 tells us why. A world in rebellion against God lives in fear, and it does not know why. Something is wrong, the people of the world are saying. They don't know why. They don't get it. They are restless and have no peace. But in the midst of all that, you see that God's people have peace when others have fear, because there's not been a relationship rupture. Their refuge is God. That rather than oppose God, the people are with them and He is with them. There's no break in the relationship. So the psalmist is able to live in peace in a world of fear. And then finally, we have peace in a world of war. Verse 8 asks us to behold the works of the Lord. In other words, we're called to look at what God has done. Verse 9 tells us what we will see when we do. Look at that. He makes wars to cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow, shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. He's destroying the weapons of war and the chariots of war. The word for chariot is actually most commonly translated in the Old Testament as wagon. So the psalmist is either telling us that the vehicles for war making, chariots, or the carts that are used to haul weapons of war, wagons, have been destroyed. And it's important for us to see this. The flow of thought isn't that the Lord has destroyed these things so that there would be peace. The flow of the thought is He's made peace, so there is no longer a need for the tools of war. And all of this leads to the climax of the book. Verse 10, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. John Lennon naively saying, war is over if you want it. But Jesus reveals in His word that war is over because He has made peace. Now, that's a quick survey of Psalm 46. And right now you're thinking, hey, we get to lunch early. I'm not done. I'm not done. It speaks of a world and hearts and chaos and people filled with dread. But in the middle of it all is a psalmist who faces the exact same conditions with confidence. Why? I'm generally a hopeful person, a blindingly hopeful person. I've said it before. I identify with the story that Ronald Reagan told about a boy who opened a gift box filled with manure. And he yelled, "Awesome!" and began to immediately dig through it. And his family asked, "What on earth are you doing?" And he said, "With this much manure, there must be a pony in here somewhere." I always think there's a pony. I am maddening to folks like Pastor John, whose job it is to tell me there might not be a pony. To constantly be saying, there's a pony in here somewhere. In March of 2020, our world was given a big old box of manure. It presented the biggest leadership challenge I've ever faced in ministry. And when it started, did what I always do. Started looking for the pony. Had to be one in there somewhere. I have always felt like I was the kind of person who could think his way out of a problem, anticipate multiple levels of challenges, and then come out fine on the other end. So early on, I felt like I was in control of the situation. I felt like I was leading our team to make good decisions, that we were thriving and our church was thriving while we adapted on the fly. Our church in those early days was unified. I'd found the pony, I thought. But it just kept coming. And it wouldn't end. And our church began to fray. And I realized that I had done all I could do. And I began to be filled with dread. Coming to church when we reopened made me physically anxious. Physically anxious. In my sabbatical, I was in counseling, and my counselor told me what anxiousness physically felt like, helped me identify it, and he said, "I want you to tell me the next time you feel that." And I said, "Well, I'm on sabbatical. I'm pretty chill right now." And he said, "Well, just tell me the next time you feel it." And I felt it pulling into a church parking lot. I was filled with anxiety. The world was in chaos, and I was helpless in the face of it, and I felt like I couldn't help us. I had no peace. What was wrong? Last month, one of our elders, Ryan Hudnall, and I spent a couple of days with some imams and other Islamic leaders from our community in a bridge building dialogue. Now, normally I'm allergic to those kinds of things. I really am. I am good friends with the imam next door, Dahi Saeed. But we are good friends and meet regularly for coffee because we understand that we live in two completely incompatible theological universes. We are friends not because we minimize our differences, but because we shine bright lights on our differences. And so I generally avoid these kinds of bridge-building meetings because they're usually based on the idea that we all worship the same God, which you can only agree to if you are, one, theologically ignorant, or two, intellectually dishonest. But this gathering was built on the idea that the relationship I have with Dahi is built on, that we live in two completely incompatible universes that will never mix. So it was all about honestly articulating those differences with kindness while trying to find ways that we could foster relationships and maybe find things that we could partner with to serve our community that everybody could agree on regardless of faith. And the format gave us an opportunity to challenge one another, and if you know me, it will not shock you that I took the opportunity to challenge. One of them was presenting, and a mom named Ahmed was presenting something called the Marrakesh Declaration. It was a declaration in 2016 by Islamic scholars and government leaders to encourage the governments of Muslim-majority nations to practice religious liberty. But it was also a tacit acknowledgement that the governments of our world with a Muslim majority have the least amount of religious liberty. So make sure you understand this. Our faith is bending people away from religious liberty. We believe it should bend people towards religious liberty. We're going to challenge everybody to practice religious liberty. But it's not working. It's not working. Even though they have, among their earliest documents, something called the Medina Charter, which frames out concepts like religious liberties. I've read that. I mean, it does. But Muslim majority nations today are the least hospitable to religious liberty on the planet. So I asked why. And I continued to ask why. A lot. To the point that Ahmed, the presenter, finally laughed and said, "Are you a lawyer?" But obviously what I was trying to do was to raise the idea that something was baked into Islam itself that lent itself to those kinds of governments being formed around it. Now, I am not denying that Christian history is littered with examples of religious persecution. Western Europe's history is just one religious persecution after another. But the faith itself always steers us back to the idea of religious liberty in the ways that Islamic faith struggles to do. That's the reason so many of your Muslim neighbors have come to the West. They don't have religious liberty where they are. They don't practice Islam in a certain way, so they've come to the West. They want that to happen in Muslim-majority countries. It's not. What's wrong? Remember that restlessness I mentioned earlier? The angst that resides in more of us than we care to admit? What's wrong? Why don't we have the psalmist's peace before anything is solved? Why are we giving in to the fear and the anger and the chaos around us? What's wrong? I'll tell you. We're forgetting about Christmas. Now, I'll admit this is not a Christmas passage. There is no prophecy of the Messiah in Psalm 46 like there are in other Old Testament passages, but its beating heart is a truth that we celebrate at Christmas. Let me walk you back through some of these verses and try to help you connect the dots. Look at verse 1. And if you're comfortable doing so, underline the words very present, help in trouble. That communicates the idea of nearness and availability. The psalmist is saying that God isn't far from his people. God's people have peace in chaos because God is with us. And he actually gets very explicit with things as it continues. Look at verse 4. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. The temple is being pictured as a refreshing, life-giving river in the midst of Jerusalem because it is the house of God. So the psalmist says in verse 5, God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when the morning dawns. God is in the midst of her. So people have peace in a world of fear because God is with us. Finally, look at verse 11. The inspiration for Martin Luther's hymn, A Mighty Fortress is Our God. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Selah. The people are at peace in a world of war because they shelter in God. God is with us. So the beating heart of the psalm is Emmanuel, God with us. In fact, the verb that gives us the name Emmanuel is in verse 11, Emanu. No, Psalm 46 isn't about Christmas, but it's about the truth that we celebrate at Christmas and which secular minds long for at Christmas. And it is the reason that we can experience peace as a certainty in our Christmas hymns and not as the hopeful thought of a beetle who couldn't figure out what was wrong. Now, of course, Christians struggle with peace like others. I have admitted as much about me. I hope internally you have admitted as much about that in your life. But folks, let me tell you what. The world would be a lot scarier if I didn't have Jesus. And I know 100% of the time that when I'm angry, I'm scared. 100% of the time, that's true about me. When I'm angry, I am scared. And it's not going to go away until Jesus remakes it new when He returns. So I have a choice to make. So do you. You know what it is? You can waste your time being angry, or you can remember that as a follower of Jesus, God is with us, and have peace that comes from that. And let me just tell you something. A church that is mobilized by the peace of Christ is going to make a world of difference more than a church that is mobilized around anger. Because we will not be communicating the same song with a different melody. We will be giving them something that they long for. We will be giving them Emmanuel. God is with us. So what are we going to do with that? How are we going to walk out of here today with this in practice? Let's spend some time in prayer as we close, thinking about how to do that.